Hi YouTube, welcome back to Rich's Random Retro Reviews. A few days ago, as of recording this video, marked 11 years since Microsoft released the Microsoft Surface RT tablet, and I thought it might be quite fun to go back and have a quick look at the device and see exactly what it was all about and why it was such a big flop. Now these can be picked up quite cheaply on eBay these days, mainly because they are useless. Now they are supremely well built, they have great build quality. There's no flexing when you twist them, and it's made out of high quality materials. Unfortunately, as you can probably see in the light, they are quite fingerprint magnets, especially these first generation ones in the dark grey. The second generation Surface RT came in a silver, so that's one way you can tell the difference between the two. If we have a quick look around the device, I'm just going to snap the keyboard off for a moment, but we'll have a look at the ports. So we have on the left hand side, we have a speaker, a 3.5mm audio out, we have a volume up and down, and then we have a little place where you can put your finger and flip out the kickstand. Across the top we have two microphones and the power button. And on the left hand side we have another speaker, we have a micro HDMI connection, a full-size USB, and then a magnetic power connector. Under the kickstand there is a micro SD card slot, so you can increase the storage. Now these came in 32 and 64GB sizes, and they support up to 200GB micro SD cards. And you think, well, you might not need to use a micro SD card if you have 32GB of storage. Well, these actually run a full install of Windows 8, and it's a special version of Windows 8. It's called Windows RT, and it's a full version of the 32-bit version of Windows 8 compiled for ARM. This runs on an NVIDIA Tegra 3 CPU. It has 4 CPU cores, 2GB of memory, 32GB of storage, the normal Bluetooth Wi-Fi. It has a touch display that can support up to 5 touch points simultaneously. It has a capacitive button here for the bringing it above the start screen, and it supports gestures from all sides of the screen. Now Windows 8 was a bit jarring. If you come from Windows 7 or any of the previous versions of Windows, you were used to having a start menu in the bottom left hand corner of the screen. It had been there since Windows 95 and it worked out pretty well. In Windows 8, when that came out, especially the developer previews, you had a taskbar but you had absolutely no start button. And for desktop and laptops it didn't really make sense, but for touchscreen devices such as the Surface, actually having these gestures was brilliant. Unfortunately, Microsoft has shut down most of the services for Windows RT, so most of these apps won't launch. And that is a particular problem these days because you can't actually install any apps other than through the Microsoft Store, and if you open up the Microsoft Store it basically sits there at a green screen. That was the only official way of getting apps on your Surface RT, but some clever people over at the XDA forums developed a jailbreak, and some people compiled applications such as Notepad++ or OpenSSH or VNC, and you could install those if you jailbroke your device. Now unfortunately the jailbreak, as far as I understand it, wasn't persistent throughout reboots. So if you rebooted your device it would be jailed again, but you could run the jailbreak and re-jailbreak the machine and then run those apps. But Microsoft basically wanted you to go through the Microsoft Store and download the apps. Now unfortunately the App Store, Microsoft couldn't really attract the big developers over to the platform, so the offerings in the Microsoft Store were few and far between. Now for a touchscreen device this was brilliant. You'd use your finger and you would move from one side to the other, do all kinds of gestures. The capacitive touch button here that brings up the start screen, that was great, but if you had a laptop or a desktop, it was a bit odd that you would have to swipe in from the side. You'd move your mouse down to the bottom right hand corner of the screen. The charms bar, as this bar was called, would pop up. You would then click on the start button. It was extra steps to get to things that were more commonly used with one click, and it didn't go down particularly well. Now, one of the advantages of the Surface RT over the iPad, let's say, is the ability to do multitasking with applications. So the Surface RT was released the year after the first iPad was released, and it had a neat trick up its sleeve. It allowed you to do multitasking. So what you could do, using your finger, you would swipe in from the one side, and you would go through your recently used applications. What you could then do is if you move over and hold, you could have two applications side by side and you could change the size. This didn't come to iOS for a long time. And then to get rid of an app, you can do that and bring it back again. You can change the order. And then to get rid of an app, you can swipe down and there we go. There's lots and lots of gestures. Now these applications, they're called, well, their code name was Metro apps, but I believe a company tried to sue Microsoft over the name, and Microsoft changed the name of the apps to Modern UI apps. So these are all Modern UI apps, but if you hear me talking about Metro apps, they're one and the same thing. Now when you first log into Windows 8, you are taken straight to the start screen, and this can be customized. You can press and hold and you can move things around. You can change the size of the icons. You can also, if you use two fingers, you could zoom out and have, if you had lots of applications, you could see them that way. Now these were great because they were dynamic and they updated. So if there was on the news, for example, a breaking news headline would come through and you would be able to see it on the news. If you had internet connectivity and you had the weather set up, you could have the local weather showing what was going on where you are or one of your preferred locations. The mail icon would show you how many new emails you had. It was really, really useful. For a tablet, great. Desktop, not so much, because not many people on a desktop or a laptop were used to using the Modern UI apps. They were used to using the desktop. And that's where Windows RT is a bit strange, because you have this kind of dual personality. You have the Modern UI apps here, which, if we open up the camera, you can see that it takes up the full screen. There's Monkey, there's my computer there. But then also, Microsoft shipped the Surface RT with an RT version of Office, so an ARM compiled version of Microsoft Office 2013. Now initially when the Surface came out with Windows 8, the Office applications were in beta. They weren't the final release versions, that came with an update a bit later. And with Windows 8.1, Outlook was included as part of the bundle, but they were desktop versions. So you have your Modern UI apps there, and if you didn't know where the rest of them were, and you didn't know that you could start typing the name of an application, you'd be a bit lost as to where your apps were. Well, if you've got touch, or if you click and hold the mouse button and drag up, you have a list of all of the apps here. So this is where things start to be a little bit strange, because on the left hand side here you have all the Modern UI apps, and then you swipe over and then you have all your traditional apps, so your control panel, your command prompt, your on-screen keyboard, task manager, Windows Defender, etc. Office 2013, that they're split into two. But why are they split into two? Well, these are the Modern UI apps, and these, for example, I don't have the scanner app. So let's swipe up. What we can do is we can long press on it, and then we can say pin to start, and it will put it over there, and then I can drag and drop and stick it wherever I want to. But if you swipe up and go over here, and by the way, I'm going to be doing some direct screen capture of this, so I'll demonstrate this actually momentarily. The screen capture won't be the best quality, because when you plug a HDMI cable in, you go from 60 Hz down to 30. And for some reason on my capture device, it's a bit jaggedy and it's not very smooth. So you'll have to bear with me on that. But let's open Microsoft Word, for example. So immediately you're taken to the desktop, and it's the normal Word that you're used to. There's a button up here, and you can toggle between a standard ribbon and a touch-friendly ribbon. And what that does, that basically changes the size of the icons to make them easier to hit with your finger. The touch targets are a lot bigger. But effectively, it's a full desktop version of Office. And if we do a save as, for example, we have the traditional save as dialog box, and you can navigate throughout your machine, plug a memory stick, which you can't do on an iPad, and you'll be able to access it that way, but it's not very touch friendly. So in one respect you've got all the Modern UI stuff, but then you've also got the legacy desktop stuff. And it's also slightly strange, because if you open up the PC settings, Some of the items in here are used to control the configuration of the device, but it's not everything. As time went on, Microsoft have started adding more and more features to the PC settings. If you have a look, for example, in Windows 11 today, there are hundreds more options than are available on this version. And that's because Microsoft is slowly trying to get rid of the old control panel and incorporate it into the new modern control panel. But you can change things like the background picture. You can change whether or not we want to do a search using Bing online. We can go back and have a look at our network settings, because obviously we have Wi-Fi. We can have a look and see how much data we've used, the connection speed, what our MAC address is, what our IP address is, all that kind of jazz. But it's not everything. And if we go to the desktop, if we go into this PC and then we can go into the control panel, here we have the traditional control panel. So what I'm going to do is I will do screen capture and we'll go through and we'll be able to see that this is the normal control panel that you would see on normal Windows 8 or Windows 8.1. And again, it's not very touch friendly. It's small. Some of the stuff does work. I mean, you can long press and go to properties and personalize and that kind of stuff. But again, the close button, the scroll bars, they're not big enough really for your finger. So you have this kind of two worlds. You have the modern UI and you have the traditional desktop. And because you have the traditional desktop, you have all the legacy stuff that comes with it. And because of that, the 32 gigs of disk space that you get, actually, after formatting and the install of Windows, you actually only get about 15 gigs of disk space. So suddenly your 32 gigs is 15, and you might struggle if you put a couple of movies on here, for example. Now the battery life on these, because they're ARM, is actually really good compared to a x86 machine, and the sleep time on these is really good. You could put this to sleep and come back to it a week later and turn it on and it's still got plenty of juice in it. I found with x86 devices, batteries tend to drain pretty quickly, and if you were to leave a device in sleep and come back to it a week later, the battery is more than likely dead. Now, one of the main problems with the Surface RT is Microsoft wanted you to go down the route of using the Microsoft Store. And the problem with that was developers weren't bringing their apps to the platform. There were things like Facebook and Twitter. I don't believe there was an Instagram app. There was a VLC app, for example. You could download all of those and run them. They were ARM32 versions. Later apps in the Microsoft Store are ARM64. So even if I could get the Microsoft Store working with this, trying to find an ARM32 app on the Microsoft Store is nigh on impossible. And because you can't run traditional desktop apps or ARM compiled versions of the desktop apps like Notepad++, for example, it does actually limit what you can do with the device. So the keyboards snap onto the bottom of the Surface with magnets, and there are some little pins here that connect to some pins on the keyboard. It all aligns magnetically and it provides power to the keyboard as well. So this one is the slightly more expensive keyboard. This one actually has physical keys and they have a little bit of travel, about 2mm, but actually you can get up to some quite decent typing speeds on these keyboards compared to the Type keyboard, which was, if you look at the back here, this material, basically there was a keyboard that looked exactly like this, but with keys on, and they weren't physical keys. But basically, the keyboard allows you to use the device as a laptop. If you open up the kickstand, you can pop it on your lap and use it as more or less like a laptop, or you could detach the keyboard and you could use the on-screen keyboard. It supports rotation, so if you hold it horizontally, vertically, it will change orientation depending on which way you're looking. So it's actually a really nice feeling device. Now this was aimed squarely at the consumer market, and the prices were $499 for the 32GB version and $599 for the 64GB version. The problem with Windows RT is there's so many restrictions that they don't really make sense to most people. And also businesses, they don't make sense at all in the business, because you can't domain join a machine, for example, and you can't manage it using your corporate MDM solutions. So you are limited in what you can do. 6 months after the launch of the Surface RT, the Surface Pro was announced by Microsoft, and that was a full x86 tablet that ran normal Windows 8 and didn't have any of the restrictions that these devices had. They could be domain joined, you could remote desktop to them, and you could manage them using your MDM solution. You could run any application through the desktop, and you weren't reliant on the Microsoft Store as the way to get your apps on your device. A year after the introduction of the Surface RT, Microsoft announced the Surface RT 2, which, as I mentioned earlier, was available in a grey colour, so you could tell the difference between the Surface RT 1 and Surface RT 2. It ran on an NVIDIA Tegra 4 CPU, again with 2GB of memory, and came in 32 and 64GB storage options, but the screen had been updated to a 1080p display, whereas this is just slightly over 720p. Microsoft then a year later discontinued the whole Surface RT line and basically kept Windows on ARM as a side project. And even today you can buy a Windows on ARM device. The Surface X, for example, runs on a Qualcomm CPU, but it also doesn't have the restrictions that Surface RT had, meaning that you can run applications downloaded from the internet, but it also includes a x86 and x64 emulation environment that allows you to run x86 and x64 applications on your ARM device. Now obviously the performance isn't going to be like running a native application, but it does open the doors to running much more software than before. Now if we swipe up, we're taken to the login screen, and once you put your password in, you're taken straight to the new start screen. This is pre-populated by Microsoft and comes with a list of common applications such as Mail, Weather, Internet Explorer and the Store. And if you swipe up again, you are taken to a list of all of the applications, and when you launch an application, you'll see that it takes up the full screen. Now if we open up a second application, this is where we can do some fancy multitasking. If we swipe in from the left, we can go back to our previous application, which was the calculator, and you can choose how much of the screen is used for each application. And if you swipe all the way to the right, then you close the calculator. If we open up the Windows Store, you'll see that we can't connect to any of the Microsoft services. And if we swipe in from the right, we get the Charm screen, and here is where we shut down the machine from. You can also personalize the start screen using one of Microsoft's horrendous wallpapers, or you can choose your wallpaper that you're using on your desktop. You can also change the background color and the accent color from here. If we open up the Charms bar, this is where we can go now to the PC settings and have a look at some of the settings of the limited options that we have. If we open up one of the copies of Internet Explorer, you'll see how slow it is to render a web page. Scrolling up and down is relatively smooth, but it takes a while for the assets to load. If we swipe up from the bottom, this is where we can open multiple tabs. So let's go to Google, and then what we'll do is we will swipe up and we will open another tab and we'll go to another web page. So you can see that we can have multiple pages open simultaneously. Now again, this does take quite a while to render. That's because of the relatively slow CPU that's in the device. But we can also multitask still. We can have calculator on one side and Internet Explorer on the other, or perhaps we could have a media player that's playing some video or audio whilst we're surfing the web. If we pinch out, we're able to see all of the applications, and then if we scroll to the right hand side and click on one of the applications there, you'll see you're taken to the desktop. And if we open Microsoft Word, you can see that again that this is a desktop version of Word, although we now have touch optimized buttons, so it's a little bit easier to use with your finger. So this is the final update to Microsoft Windows RT. It's called Update 3 and it has a new start menu. Over time, Microsoft were trying to improve the usability of Windows. Here we can see we have a kind of familiar start button. We have all applications which not only show the modern apps, but they show the traditional desktop apps, but we have some of the modern UI tiles on the right hand side. If we open up the system properties, here you can see the CPU, the amount of memory, and also that Windows is activated, plus a phone number should you have any problems. And if you press and hold on the taskbar and open Task Manager, and then click the Performance tab, you can see what the CPUs are doing and also how much memory is being used. And to shut the machine down, we're swiping from the right. We click on Settings, click on Power, and click on Shutdown. Thanks so much for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.